Okay, something that has actually been really getting on my mind a lot lately is generational curses. The thing about generational curses is actually something that we really need to, it's hard to talk about that, especially being in the esoteric field. And then also talking about, how generations actually look at things. The thing is, I don't think that it's actually a curse. I think that it's actually a state of mind. The thing is, it doesn't even actually mean that we're looking at something at a value of family, but really just our generations in general. One thing that I have been looking at, especially on social media in the last few years, is how people want to talk. Like, okay, let's look at the baby boomers. Let's look at Generation X. Let's look at Generation Y. Let's look at generations of the millennials, Generation Z. Let's look at the indigo children. Let's look at the violet children. Let's look at all of these individuals who were just like you and me at one point. At what point do you actually look at generations and realize that you're not so different from them? At what point do you look at how people are and how children are today and realize that you are just like them? The thing is, yes, there's more and more of them now who are seemingly disrespectful, but we were entitled and disrespectful. The thing is, I look at baby boomer generation especially, and they are extremely disrespectful individuals. I look at Generation X, who thinks that they're better than other generations, be extremely entitled and disrespectful. I look at millennials who were raised by baby boomers and Generation X, expected to be better when those were children who were raised by hippies, children who were raised by people who were teenagers. My mother was 19 when she had me. I'm 39 and she is about to be 59. She ain't much different from me. She had me in a time where having children of mixed race was not cool. And believe me, I got the generational curse from that. So when I am expected for my age to act a certain way, it makes me extremely angry, especially for a long time when I was considered Generation Y, and just recently they decided to make me a millennial. 1983. That was a time where a lot of children were born during the AIDS pandemic. It was called GRID in 1981 to 83. We also saw a lot of political uproar. I grew up in a time where, when I was in the 90s, we had to look at it like this. The age of consent was 15. 15 in the state of Washington. And I had to run away and join the circus. That's a whole nother story, but I was expected to be an adult. But now we are seeing so many people my age who have been a part of unfortunate circumstances where we were expected to grow up a little too quickly. And we did grow up too quickly. And then I see so many people my age who were, well, as you would expect back then. They grew up in suburban homes, they grew up with sheltering. And of course, The generations before us tried to help us, but unfortunately, we did not necessarily perpetuate the same thing, which is why you're seeing so much outpour and outrage and all of these things about age differences. The Generation X generation, especially, is extremely ageist. When I was in my 20s, I would meet people who were in their 30s who would disrespect me for being younger. Just because I was that age group. They would call me arrogant, but then I would see how they acted when they were younger and they were just as arrogant and just as entitled. It's just that there were more freaks. People like me, LGBTQ, punks, goths, all that other groovy shit. Well, this is what you ended up getting. So then you see the Generation Z, the people that people are calling the whiners, the ones that will complain and talk about trauma. That's exactly what we did in the 90s. It's no different. One thing that I really get disgusted by is watching people decide that they have gotten better with their ages, when really I'm looking at a lot of people in their 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s to the 20s, all acting about the same. Except for it's not very woke, is it? To me, it looks like fascism and glitter, but I mean, it really is one of those situations where you can't really categorize someone, can you, by just looking at them and assuming. You can't just put someone in some age group. Because when I was 12 years old, I was living on the streets at those points. I had already had to grow up. I was already put in some pretty bad situations, and then I was conditioned to put myself in really bad positions, and then blamed. And then I was told to blame myself for putting myself in those positions, or blame my parents, or blame some system, when really there's no one to blame. No one to blame but my examples. And it's not pretty. It's not what you want to hear. It's not what you want to see. But unfortunately, sometimes you have to go through growing pains. Ageism needs to stop, but it's not going to. And even with this video, it's not going to change the world. We want to change the world, but nobody wants to change. Nobody wants to empathize. They want to talk about being empaths, but they want to be apathetic. They want to talk about spiritual revolution, but yet do the same thing that was done. You want to stop a war by creating another war. And then you see, well, children doing certain things. They're replicating us. When I was 15 years old in 1999 in Littleton, Colorado, there was a school shooting. And that started a whole series of a bunch of other school shootings. Bullied teenagers, allegedly queer or whatever you want to call them, because the thing is, that's not what they were. There was a version of that story, but that wasn't what was real. The bottom line is they were bullied kids. And I mean, I wasn't, a part of anything whatsoever. But I also knew what it was like to be a bullied and ostracized kid and say things. And things went way too far, apparently, for them. But then we're looking at the same cycle over and over. When are we going to learn? They're just us, and we're them. I write these things and they seem like speeches and blogs and blurbs, but the thing is, it actually is a really harsh reality, is that we're looking at a mirrored reflection from Generation X, actually, if you really want to blame a generation. But they're not really to blame either, because they were supposed to, well, learn something, but they ended up perpetuating the very thing. The millennials were supposed to learn something, but perpetuated it. Generation Z, it's heading the same direction. When are we going to stop blaming generations? Because right now, that's the only generational curse that I see. I don't blame my mother for how I turned out because of the fact that I became an adult at a very young age. I don't blame my father. I don't blame anyone, actually. Well, that's not true. I blame a broken system that was broken before I had a chance to fix it. And the very few things that I did do to fix it, which isn't important anymore. It's gone. So, remember when you decide to go after someone because of their age? You don't really know them. You don't know what they're going through. And every time you want to make fun of teenagers for doing the same thing you did, I understand it's a projection and a reflection, but the thing is, could you imagine what they're seeing now? All the generations before them making and perpetuating the same mistakes and not really having the tools. I'd be crying too because, quite frankly, I had to fight back tears at least 5 times. Just remember that.